All right, everybody, we're just going to give it just a couple of minutes for everybody to show up, then we'll get started here in just a second. All right, as long as everybody is ready to go, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have got a lot of stuff to get through tonight and a lot of technical stuff, a lot of notes to go over. So if anybody shows up late, they can always just rewind. And this, of course, will be on our YouTube channel afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started with the weather. So if I can get this going here. There we go. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag on my end. My internet connection is not super great today. But as far as weather goes, for the next 12 hours, pushing out, looks like the southeast and some parts of the Midwest are going to have really low cloud ceilings. Great for counter surveillance or really any anti sort of visual surveillance. For those of you that didn't catch our first live stream on this, we're not including this slide to make any sort of statement or anything. It's just getting everybody in the mood of seeing, weather and then the intel report, because that's usually something that gets done in the intelligence field. So covering the weather, really the only thing that anybody should be concerned about nationally is cloud ceilings as far as intel is concerned. So I wanted to talk about that, about cloud ceilings being pretty low throughout the southeast for the next 12 hours at least. And as far as tonight, at least Eastern time, the EENT is going to be at 21:16, and it's going to be the same pretty much whatever time zone you're at. Around a little after 9 p.m., quarter after 9 is going to be when the sun finishes setting. So also, the illumination for tonight, we're in a dark illumination period. We're in red illum, so there's no moon, so it's going to be very, very dark outside tonight. And then pushing forward to this other slide, let me know if you guys want me to keep including this slide. I kind of like it, but if it's kind of redundant, then I'll go ahead and axe it. But this just shows the cloud tops and sometimes the lowers, the cloud ceilings for various locations throughout the country. As you can see, the southeast, particularly little parts of the Midwest, will have pretty good cloud ceilings for the next 18 hours. And moving forward for NOTAMs, really nothing significant to report today. I've checked; there haven't been any interesting ones pop up other than the usual ones down by the Mexican border for security purposes. No VIP movements that I've seen. So yeah, we can just go ahead and skip right over this one for today. And likewise, not a whole lot of change from last briefing as far as the civil unrest forecast goes. I will say that for Elizabeth City, there has been a little bit of local unrest, but it's really it's not a really populated area, so the forecast for that one still remains the same. As long as that investigation is ongoing. And we've added a couple of demonstrations, protests, and such today. There were two today. Supposedly a pride march in Seattle. I didn't observe if that actually happened or not. It was supposed to be earlier today. It might be going on right now. I don't know. And there was also a various Palestinian demonstrations today in Washington, D.C. All very low-level stuff. And there's also coming up. There is a Pro 2A protest / demonstration. Going to be, it says all capitals, but I'm not really sure who's behind it or what agency. I know it's not the main gun rights activist groups like Gun Owners of America or Farmers Policy Coalition. I don't think they're involved with it, but just something to keep in mind moving forward in time. And what everybody is going to be hearing a lot about tonight is the Colonial pipeline hack. This is sort of the main subject for tonight. So I know this slide is very text heavy. This is really a one-slider on the whole deal. And if you follow us on our other platforms, you will have seen this slide already for the most part, except for minor edits and changes. But really, just to get into the meat of the matter, obviously there's going to be gasoline shortages. But really what's concerning to us when it comes to a sort of strategic or defense type thing is the actual hack itself. So we really don't have a whole lot right now, and as one might expect, the mainstream media is kind of making up whatever they can in the absence of information. And since they're uneducated and they don't know how these systems work, they can't even make an educated guess. So, but the long and the short of it is that pipelines require a lot of software to work. Obviously, this is a very intense process. There's a lot of moving parts, quite literally and figuratively, honestly. And the types of IT systems that pipeline owners and operators use to manage these millions of different processes are called SCADA systems, generally speaking, supervisory control and data acquisition automation systems. Now, these systems, once again, very broadly, they control all the nuts and bolts of how a pipeline works, right? It's not literally just a pipe, right? There are pumping stations, there are transfer stations, there's all kinds of moving parts to this, and it requires automation. Well, here's the interesting part about that automation. These systems specifically are not internet-based. They're supposed to be air-gapped from the rest of, well, really everything else, meaning that there is not a single wire, there's not a single digital signal, not even a Bluetooth capability or anything that connects this system to the actual internet. And this is expressly done to prevent hacking and cyber attacks. So one might start putting the things together, start putting the point together here. But when it comes to pipeline security, for pipelines, especially in America, the security is no joke. This is one of the very few fields that is very much a national defense issue. As such, pipelines are protected just as much as nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants and things like that. There are very, very strict requirements that companies like Colonial Pipeline have to adhere to simply because these companies are so important that the government takes a vested interest in how they are run. Just think about it. It might not seem a big deal to have a gas shortage where you can't fill your vehicle up, but think about jet fuel for military aircraft. Well, now it's a national defense issue. Do you see how that works? So just like how federal intelligence agencies sort of surveil and keep an eye on, say, Iranian foreign exchange students at, studying nuclear engineering at a major university, the feds most certainly take an interest in this sort of thing for a good reason. It might not seem like a national defense issue, but it's one of the most significant ones. So when people like us see this sort of event happen, our alarm bells start going off for many different reasons, but perhaps the I guess instinctive reason is that if there were one single event that were, well, if we were to go to war with Russia or China in a conventional conflict, this is the type of event that we would see first, along with a myriad of other events, but that we can talk about at another time. But this level of cyber attack is, again, a lot more serious than most people will realize until it's far too late and you can't get gas anywhere. Which is why it's, at least from our perspective, my perspective especially, which is it's tragically hilarious that President Biden can get on the TV and state that there are no indications that the Russian government is involved. When I heard that, I could not help but laugh, because this kind of attack is something that only a nation state can actually do. Now, which nation state it is, that's up for debate, but this isn't something that a criminal with a laptop can do, right? This kind of attack would require months of planning involving dozens, if not hundreds of people, and resources and intelligence collection efforts that only a nation state can provide. So saying that the perpetrators of the cyber attack are just a group of criminals is simply a blatant lie. That's not true. They may have criminal elements, that's how these things work, but they're definitely not just some guy with a laptop. So, pushing past the origins of this attack, the origins of this attack aside, the fact that this sort of thing can even happen in the first place proves that the defense of our national infrastructure might be crumbling a bit more than we think. We've always thought that these things really get swept under the rug, but nowadays especially we should pay attention. Of course, moving forward, we're probably going to never know exactly what happened with the cyber attack. I mean, even if I were, the feds, like, I would not want to release any details of how it happened because I wouldn't want any repeat offenders or, certainly the federal government doesn't want people, knowing just how vulnerable our infrastructure is, and that, both good and bad. But so we're probably not going to learn much more than we already do right now. So we're going to be on the lookout for more information on this one, but I honestly wouldn't expect much. And at this point, I would not expect anything that I hear about the pipeline to be true. But whatever, I suppose. And, considering that Colonial Pipeline's entire website is down right now, like their commercial, .com website is down, we're assessing with pretty high confidence that this cyber attack is much more severe and widespread than previously thought. Um, and the interesting part is that all of this comes, right during a busy travel holiday when in past weeks we have noted that trucking and freight companies are having a hard time keeping up with the demand to specifically ship unleaded gasoline. If you were to do like a Google search for like news, like, well, first of all, good luck finding anything, but if you were to do an online search or some kind of DuckDuckGo or something for news from a couple of weeks ago, specifically with the keyword gasoline, you'll find a lot of mainstream media articles talking about how we're having a hard time getting actual truckers to drive gasoline because there's gasoline shipments to different gas stations because there's just not enough truckers, right? This goes hand in hand with what we mentioned last week or last briefing when I was talking about the shortage of trucking. Well, what that kind of affects it right now directly, don't you think? So I would be very, very, I would not be surprised at all if this, doesn't turn into something more significant by the end of this week. I would guess that we're going to see a lot more shortages by the end of this week, just sort of bottom line, I guess. But on the other hand, this kind of issue is interesting because some areas might not notice any outages or shortages of gasoline at all. So our just-in-time delivery system is perfectly balanced for the most part, most of the time. It's perfectly balanced in such a way that the slightest upset can either have dire consequences or nothing can happen at all in some other areas. Like, for example, a gasoline truck crashing on the interstate in, say, like Alabama could quite literally directly result in a 7-Eleven in New Jersey not having gasoline for a couple of days, not just a couple of hours of the accident caused, right? And a 45-minute traffic jam in Texas could result in a Sheetz or some other gas station in South Carolina not having gas for several hours, right? So these things are really difficult to predict, and it's not like a 45-minute delay on the front end is going to equal a 45-minute delay on the back end. No, that's not how it works. You're going to have at least double because you've got 45 minutes of delay and 45 minutes of demand going up. So you're not going to have, it's not a perfect equation on either end, right? So these things are really hard to predict because in some areas where there's the highest demand, we might see an overcompensation in the allocation of gasoline. So the areas you might expect to be hardest hit, like major cities like Washington, D.C. or Atlanta, they might actually do all right because they're going to have so much gasoline trucked in to meet that perceived demand, right? And other areas that are really remote and out in the middle of the country, right, they might only see a price increase, but no actual shortage, right? Gas prices are going to go up across the country because of this, but some areas that are remote might not see a shortage because they just don't have the people to come get the gas, right? But we fully expect, generally speaking, the majority of these states to experience sporadic shortages over the next week, possibly 2 weeks, if the pipeline remains offline. So, moving on to our usual logistics slide. I know there's a lot of red on this slide. It looks really scary at the moment, but don't worry, we're going to talk about this all in more in depth. I just wanted to show this slide again to highlight the changes from last week. Changes highlighted in red. You see a little red ring around the little icons I dropped on there. Really two main points before we get back into the gasoline shortage. The microchip shortage has gotten worse. There have been a lot of auto manufacturers over the past few days specifically say, hey, we're changing the design of our cars because we can't get microchips, the kinds of silicon chips that we need. So That's going to be an issue moving forward into the car buying season right this year. And also kind of a random one, but I thought I'd throw it in here anyway. Mississippi, a lot of the state government has done a lot of complaining, and they've published reports that state that 1/3 of all school districts in the state of Mississippi are facing teacher shortages. I don't know what that means specifically, other than obviously they probably don't have enough teachers, but I don't know how that all shakes out in the numbers wise. And also, remember again, the source of this is, an entity that's most likely to profit from having increased teachers. So, just wanted to throw that out there for any of you who are located in Mississippi. You probably already know about it, but just wanted to throw that one on there. So, let's talk about each of these states in red. The states in red are the states in which a state of emergency has been declared, or some kind of something is going on with the gasoline supply. And before I forget, I also forgot to mention Ohio and West Virginia. You guys are also seeing price increases, as I'm sure you're aware. Even though you're not directly served by the pipeline, we're seeing actual reports on social media of people hopping over the border, particularly from Western Pennsylvania, hopping over the border into Ohio to get gasoline there, which is going to, of course, drive your prices up. So that's something to keep in mind. You guys, even though you're not directly served by the Colonial pipeline, you're still getting affected. So let's go ahead and break out these states by region, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in depth. So let's see here, logistical disruptions in the Northeast. So on this slide, don't really have a whole lot for you guys. New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, not a whole lot's happening for you guys just yet. You guys will be hit later on, but the next slide is really going to be the most impacts here. The Mid-Atlantic region, including from Maryland all the way down to South Carolina, is really where I broke this one up. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Those 4 states are definitely getting hit the hardest, and there's a lot going on this slide, so let me explain. So the color of the state indicates the level of severity of the gas shortage as of, what did I say the information cutoff date was? 15:30, something like that, 15:30 today. And the percentages indicate the percentage of gas stations in the entire state that are reporting they have zero gas. So in Virginia, 7.6% of all gas stations operating within the state are out of gas, completely black on gas. So as you can see, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina getting hit the hardest because the pipeline goes right through there. So closer you are to the pipeline, the smaller storage tanks you have to have. So that kind of makes sense. Also, North Carolina, the Outer Banks, you guys continuously get screwed with things like this. When it comes to fuel shortages and really anything, because it's such a remote area. But one thing to keep in mind, and this is something that really nobody's talking about, is the culture of these particular states. So a lot of people are saying, okay, well, yeah, they're black on gas now. They're losing most of their gas because people are going out and panic buying. Well, we're going to talk about panic buying in a minute, but you have to remember these states are hurricane states, so they are very much aware that when there's a hint of a gas shortage, guess what people go do? They go out and get some freaking gas because they know shortages are a thing. They know that it's not so much a panic buying thing so much as a readiness thing. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about that. The cities on there show that the cities are mostly most heavily hit. Now the dot, if you don't see your city on here, it's not because you don't have a shortage. It's because I personally, and the other guys on the team here that were helping me scour social media all day today, couldn't find any proof or any sort of indication that there was a shortage in your area. We've got 1,000 people per minute on social media, like on Twitter, posting pictures of a gas a line at a gas pump, but that doesn't really tell us much because they rarely tell us the address of the gas station. So we're just getting this information from sources I'll talk about here in a minute. But Kentucky hasn't quite been hit so hard just yet, but Tennessee's creeping up there, particularly in the Nashville area and Cleveland. People are coming over from North Carolina to get you guys' gas, but yeah, North Carolina is getting hit pretty hard. So is South Carolina. Now, I know South Carolina, there's only 2.9% of their gas stations are out of gas. I know that seems like a kind of a misnomer. Why is there less than half the gas stations are out, but yet they're the same color as Virginia, North Carolina? Well, it's because that percentage of gas stations that are out in South Carolina are the most populated ones. So Columbia, Myrtle Beach, Charleston, those particular areas are running out fast. So moving on down to the Deep South, what I'm calling the Deep South, here is, like I mentioned, Atlanta, Georgia. 5.2% of all gas stations in the state of Georgia are completely out of gas. Now, in Georgia, it seems like, from the atmospherics, from what we can tell, it seems like the southern part of the state is having the hardest time, because southern part of Georgia is really remote, and there aren't that many gas stations per like mile, so to speak, as there are in a lot of other areas, and the ones along the interstate are obviously going to get eaten up first. So, southern part of Georgia is suffering a little bit more than the northern part of Georgia. And the inverse is true in Florida. For Florida, it seems like if you're in Orlando and south of Orlando, the southern part of Florida, you're doing all right. That's why I left the state red. But the northern part of Florida, by Tallahassee and Pensacola, yeah, there isn't any gas for like 100 miles up there, from what we've been seeing. Now, of course, that could change quite quickly by just a simple delivery. But as far as the other southern states, you guys are not seeing too much happiness. As far, Alabama only 0.5%. Sorry, the other states, I didn't have time to pull those percentages for you. But they're not really being hit that hard anyway. Interesting note about Louisiana. I guess Louisiana learned they've already started rationing gasoline in some areas. Not all areas, but some gas stations we're seeing limit people to 5 gallons per vehicle. And Georgia also, suspended their gasoline tax, so to prevent price gouging. So, just as a point of sort of overall consensus on this, we're probably not going to see. We're going to see prices increase nationwide from this. Like, so if that was your question, yes, we're absolutely going to see nationwide price increases, but we're not going to see like $38 a gallon gasoline, because what's going to happen is the federal government or the state government or even the municipal government is going to come in and enact like wartime procedures, as some states already have. Like I think Virginia enacted something to prevent price gouging. So we're not going to see gas prices be like insanely high. What we're going to deal with mostly is a supply issue. Supply is the problem here. It's not demand. It will be demand. Probably, if it isn't already, it will be very, very soon once people's gas tanks go empty. So that's where I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a break and discuss something that I've been seeing a lot on social media. So I really had a thought on this, so I wanted to share it to kind of clear the water a little bit on this. So a lot of people are comparing the gasoline shortage right now with the toilet paper shortage earlier. Like, okay, the people are hoarding gasoline now, they're freaking out, and they're buying all of the gasoline they can, just like with toilet paper. Well, there's a very strong difference, because here's exactly what happened with the toilet paper incident. And forgive this quasi-nonsensical graph on your screen. I could not figure out a way to demonstrate this in any sort of way that makes sense. So if you have any kind of background in economics, you would understand that demand and capacity, the blue line there and the yellow line, should be stacked on top of each other, honestly. But I broke them out just so that you could see them. So just as a caveat, because I know I'm going to hear about it in the comments, but so what happened with the toilet paper incident is, through a lot of nonsense, social media, and just utter calamity, right? The supply was not affected at all. The production capability, which specifically was the amount of toilet paper being produced, not like the amount that was on the shelves, right? Because all of that means supply, but I'm talking about specifically the toilet paper coming out of the Charmin factory, right? That never changed throughout all of this. Because if you think about it, some people get crazy on social media. They go out and they buy all the toilet paper they can get. Well, Charmin knows that that's going to be temporary. So they're not going to invest tens of millions of dollars building a new toilet paper factory that's going to be a decades plus commitment for them financially. They're just going to do this, and they're going to wait for the demand to calm back down and for people to get control of themselves, and everything is going to go back to normal, which is exactly what happened. So that's why you had a shortage. This is where the shortage took place with the toilet paper stuff, right? Demand spiked for a bit, and then you had the supply in this, like, being the toilet paper that was out there in the stores dried up for a little bit, but the production capacity remained the same. It was a constant throughout the entire thing. So here's what we have going on with the pipeline incident. Instead of people freaking out and going crazy, what you have is a production capacity going down almost to zero instantly. They shut the pipeline down as a precautionary measure, or if you believe what they say, some people might say that it was, that it was intentionally done, whatever. Doesn't matter. They went down to zero production capability. 0 gallons of gasoline were flowing through that pipeline. Well, at least up until now, right? They're very few. In North Carolina, I heard that they're manually operating the pipeline now, whatever that means. I assume probably with diesel generators or something like that. But the point is that production went down to 0. So then you have an interesting thing happen. So with demand, people's, like, right when it happened, there were very few people that went out and said, "Oh my God, I need to go get gasoline right now." Very few people did that. More so than I would probably think, but that's why we pushed the update out as soon as we learned about it. Say, hey, this is going to be an issue, and here's why. Because this is the moment in which we alerted everybody, or the sort of anybody who had any sort of understanding as to how this works, went out and got gasoline. Because here's the deal: the production capacity is going to go down. So as people's tanks go dry, you now have a skyrocketing demand. Now, at some point in time, now granted, this is, like I mentioned, kind of a bad way of explaining this, but it's the only way I've got, so bear with me here. At some point in time, you're going to have manual operations kick over. You're going to have trucking companies start stepping up. The government changes the rules to allow truckers to drive more hours. That's going to increase your capacity a little bit, but for those of you that could probably guess, there is no way that trucking companies can keep up with the demand of a pipeline. It is a literal drop in the tank compared to a pipeline. So when a pipeline goes down, people like me and everybody else here on the ST Underground staff go, uh-oh, that's not good. So now we are sort of, if you can see my mouse, we are somewhere along this blue line. So that is something that we don't exactly know where we're at, but we are somewhere here. And of course, once again, this is not the end of the world, right? This is not a Armageddon or anything like that. The gasoline production will come back online. That will happen. So once the systems gradually come back online, they might just flip the switch and turn the pipeline back on. I doubt it. I think they're gradually going to come back online. And then we will, of course, once the systems are fully online, we will see demand immediately return to normal, because once people go fill their vehicle up with gasoline, there you go. Now, gas prices will probably stay high for a while, just because the economy doesn't work, instantly like that. So it's going to take a while. There's going to be a lot of wonky stuff in the market, stuff that I'm definitely not smart enough to understand, but I'm smart enough to understand that that's going to happen. But that's why we're in this. This is what our shortage looks like now. Now, here's the kicker. Here's the $64,000 question, right? We don't know how long it's going to take. This is an unknown amount of time, right? That's why it makes sense to go out and get as much gasoline as you possibly can, or when this thing kicked off. But it didn't make any sense to go out and buy all the toilet paper you can. Does that sort of make sense for everybody? Because that's sort of like how we're looking at it in terms of things. Now, I know everybody that the next question, then the implication is, do I go out and buy gas right now? Well, I mean, that's on you, I suppose. If I can tell you what I did. I went and filled up as much gasoline as I had capacity for to safely do. I'm not filling up bathtubs of gasoline in my house or anything. Fill up a vehicle, fill up a couple of cans if you've got them, and do what you can on that front. But you might not have the luxury. So like right now in my area, there is no gasoline. Like I have no gasoline for roughly 100 miles around me. And by the time gasoline does show up, because people are finding out that the Gas Buddy app and website has a tracker to show what gas stations have gas in them right now, there are there are problems with that because I found that, like, for instance, the Gas Buddy app is not perfect. For one, the website's been down for a good portion of the day because people figured it out, and they're using that. But I also found that specifically for me, I went to 7 gas stations. Uh, let's see, last night, all 7 of them on the Gas Buddy app said they had gas, and none of them did. So, take that for what it is. So I personally would not recommend going out hunting for gas unless you're sure that you've one, have the capacity for it. Don't do anything unsafe, obviously, but uh, make sure that you're going to not burn more gas than you're going to get. So obviously, just be smart. I'm probably preaching to the choir on that, but I knew I would get that question. So there is that. Now, think about that for a minute, let that stew, and we're going to switch topics just for a second and go on to our significant governmental actions slide. Really, not a whole lot going on this week, thank goodness, but the 2 things that are going on are mildly interesting, so I thought I'd point them out. For the first one, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is launching a new, they call it warning system, I call it surveillance package, to track threats, quote-unquote threats, on social media. We know how that's going to go. DHS is targeting political dissidents on social media, so they're using your tax dollars to buy billion-dollar software to make that work. So something to keep your eye on. Read more about that on your own time. And then also something that not a whole lot of people are going to care about, but the JEDI contract has been scrapped. So for those of you that don't know, JEDI is, what does it stand for? The Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, something like that. It's one of those programs where some nerd in the DoD wanted the JEDI acronym, so they named their program to be the JEDI acronym. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What it is the DoD's cloud computing contract for sending classified information over the cloud, right? So, for years now, Microsoft has held that thing. So anybody who's an Intel guy in the normal real world knows that everybody in all SIPR and JWIC systems are going to be using Microsoft, right? Everybody was rejoicing when they finally upgraded to Windows 7, like years ago, or a couple of years ago actually. So here's why this is something normal civilian type people might want to take an interest in, is that Amazon got kind of salty because Microsoft won the contract, and Amazon sued the federal government or something like that, and really upset, claiming that President Trump exerted undue influence over the system. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying that's what they're saying. And it's working its way through the court systems right now. Amazon's kind of making a big stink about it because it's a $10 billion contract. And so Microsoft, or the DoD, is putting like feelers out there. They're putting the word out there like, hey, JEDI might be scrapped. Like, we might be pulling the plug on this and going with Amazon. And that's kind of a concern because, as one might expect, I don't know about you, but I don't really want, Amazon or Jeff Bezos to have their claws any more into the defense infrastructure than they already do. Now, granted, I think Microsoft and Amazon are competing for tyrannical companies of like humanity, right? So I trust, Microsoft and Amazon about as much as I trust Bill Cosby as my bartender. But whenever these things get tossed out, things get turned upside down, and you might suddenly find out that Amazon now works for the U.S. government. So even more so than they already do. So enough on that, and let's move on to some international issues. So the biggest one for today, which everybody's feed has most likely been exploding with, sort of, kind of pun intended on that one. It looks like a little mini war has kicked off in Israel. I wrote this bullet point last night, but so it's a little stale, but here's the skinny on how this is going down. So you really have to go back to 1967 during the Six-Day War between Israel and Palestine, or whoever was in charge at the time, to understand what's going on today. I'm not going to talk about 30 or 40 years or 50 years or 100 years since World War I, right, of why the Middle East is jacked up. But the short and sweet version of what's going on right now is Israel tried to evict, or they voted to, their diplomatic system, their politicians voted to evict Palestinians from the Sheikh Jarrah, or Al Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem. We're talking about maybe an area that's 2 city blocks, maybe. So they tried to evict Palestinians from there and claim that as their own. You can look on a map and find out where that's at. I wish I had put a map on here. Anyway, so Israel tries to evict Palestinians from this neighborhood in Jerusalem. And this neighborhood is a hot button issue with Palestinians because this is one of the first ones that Israel invaded back during that 6-day war, right? So Palestinians are really salty, and they kind of remember that. So Palestinians did not like that, as one might expect. So they chose to protest this during celebrations at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, right now is Ramadan. Ramadan's going on throughout the Middle Eastern world. So, on one of the most important nights of Ramadan, it's what's called the Night of Destiny. If you Google it, you'll find it is the most important night of Ramadan for reasons that I cannot explain because I don't really understand how it all works. But I know that it's followed by Eid al-Fitr a couple of days later, and Ramadan ends. Well, here's the deal. A lot of Palestinians try to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque to worship and pray and do their thing, right, on the Night of Destiny at this mosque. Well, Israel said no, and they blocked off access to it. They shut down traffic. They stopped buses. People are usually bussed in from all over the West Bank to go to this. So they shut down the bus lines. They shut down everything. And they put riot police everywhere, and it just kind of spiraled out of control. Because now, almost 24 hours later, it's not so much about people going to the mosque to worship so much as it is about the possession of the mosque itself. So the mosque itself just so happens to be built right on the top of the Temple Mount. So if you look at a map of Israel, you will see that pretty much everything is within a few meters of itself, right? So the world's main religions are like just a couple of feet away from each other. And this is one of those situations where these holy sites, which are the source of so much conflict, right, particularly locally conflict, right? The world's main religions, these sites are literally just a couple, like we're talking tens of meters here apart. So everybody's fighting for control of just a few feet of ground. And on top of that is kind of like a side thing, but not really a side thing anymore. Israel, a couple of weeks back, they did this intentionally. Like, I'm convinced they did this intentionally. Israel just so happened to like fling a date on a calendar and so pick right now to carry out the largest military exercise they've ever done, which they call Operation Chariots of Fire. Well, this is supposed to simulate total war on all fronts, and them simulating basically the end of the world type war. And this is one of those exercises that's kind of transitioned into not really an exercise anymore. So all these troops, sort of like how Russia did with Ukraine, like all these troops happen to be, oh, we're here for an exercise. Oh, we're not here for an exercise anymore. So that's kind of how it's shaking out. Now, whenever we talk about issues, talking about Israel and Palestine, right, we've got to kind of balance things out, because I either get some kind of letter bomb in the mail from one side, or I get, really alt-right guys trying to dox me and try to figure out where I live from the other side. So the Palestinians, in the past 24 hours, they've gotten their licks in too. They've launched several, I think it's over a couple hundred rockets at least now over the past 72 hours. And they're IDF, right? They're indirect fire. So they're just shooting these things. They've hit schools. They've killed a lot of kids. All kinds of stuff. They actually hit. If you're following us on Telegram, I've got the video up there. I sent it to be. I don't know which one I sent to be posted on Telegram, but there should be a couple of videos on our Telegram page, and you can see it all over Twitter and all over the internet, of the Trans-Israel pipeline is now on fire, and that's not a good thing. So here's the deal. All as much bias aside as possible, depending on whatever side you pick to support. I don't really pick a side, but here's the deal. Both Palestine at this point in time, right? Whatever time it is. I don't have a clock in front of me. Whatever time it is, both the Palestinians, Hamas, you call them what you want. They call themselves freedom fighters. Israel calls them terrorists. I think they're a little of both, but more terrorists than not. In any case, they're not backing down. They said they're going to kill as many people as possible. Well, that's because that's what Hamas does. Israel, likewise, said they're going to kill as many people as possible on their side. So there is a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are going on right now. Neither side in this conflict is ready to back down. They haven't killed each other enough just yet. So we're betting that this conflict is going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. So the Palestinians and the Israelis are going to kill each other for quite a few more days before we start seeing things get better. So you just keep that in mind as you're going through social media and seeing some really bad and awful stuff. This is kind of what we're predicting. So how it all shakes out, we don't know, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. Conflict is never a good thing in that part of the world, no matter who you support. So yeah, we'll provide more updates as we get them on that front. Moving on to slightly less depressing news, but equally as, well, maybe slightly less important. France is going through some. They're going through some stuff right now. Civil unrest has been brewing for I don't know, maybe a year or so now. And a couple weeks ago, like no kidding, active duty generals and active duty soldiers, like hundreds, if not thousands of them, wrote letters to Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, voicing their concerns with his so-called concessions to Islam. So a lot of the more conservative, I guess you would call them conservative in France, a lot more of those people are very upset with the leadership of France because of perceived or actual concessions to Islam. You got to remember, they had the whole Charlie Hebdo thing. They're still a little bit salty about that, as one can probably expect. And they've got a tinge of what's going on in this country when it comes to Islamic type issues is also in France as well. But I put this on the slide because history has told us that whenever a bunch of French generals are upset over something, you put your tea down and you listen for a second. So that's something to keep an eye on because that's important. And then finally, I got an advanced question. Sorry, I don't have a whole product for you, but when it comes to Mexico, so for those of you that haven't been living in the area or following what's going on, Mexico is kind of on fire right now when it comes to civil unrest, particularly with the cartels. So cartel actions, conflict between the cartels, either the Sinaloa guys or the CJ&G guys, the Jalisco guys. There has been a lot of conflict between them. They're fighting a lot. I wouldn't necessarily call it a war, but it sure does look like it. I would say that the cartels are definitely at war with the Mexican government. And the DEA seems to think so too in the United States because the DEA just a couple of weeks ago reported a quote-unquote unraveling of efforts to work within Mexico. So even our DEA is having a hard time because the Mexican officials, their Mexican counterparts, when it comes to drug stuff and hunting cartel guys down and stuff like that, nobody in Mexico wants to work with the DEA, which I kind of get it. I get it, but in Mexico they're worried about having bad things happen to them and have body parts show up on their family's doorstep. So the situation in Mexico is not good. Also of note, some cartel groups appear to have shifted dramatically from shipping drugs into the United States to shipping people. So a couple of cartels, the CJ&G, arguably one of the biggest, most significant ones in Mexico right now, the DEA caught on about a couple of months too late, but this has been going on for at least a year now, at least. They have switched over to human trafficking a lot. They didn't used to do that. They didn't used to support like coyote operations or anything like that, but they do now, and they are trucking people in. That's why if you turn on a lot of if you turn on any sort of mainstream media, you're not going to hear about this at all. And if you turn on conservative media, what you'll see is probably some unknown conservative-ish reporter down at the border filming people come across the border saying the border is open. Well, yeah, the border is open more or less because there's no fence there, right, for the most of it. And our nation's politicians have made it clear that we're not really interested in that. So, what would you do if you were a cartel and needed to make some money? You'd ship people in too. So I don't know if I would go so far as to point fingers at any particular person, place, or thing as to the cause of it, but I can tell you it's happening right now. So that's going on as well. So Yeah, I could spend probably 10 years talking about, I could have a 10-year PowerPoint talking about the situation in Mexico, but it is important. It is important to stay abreast of and make sure that you know what's going on, particularly if you live in that area. And also, if particularly if you live along the border of Mexico, you already know this as well. But we're testing out a lot of surveillance stuff down there too. So that's also handy to keep an eye on, because if it's down there at the Mexican border, it could be over your house soon. So not to be Debbie Downer or anything, but um, yeah, that's really all I have for tonight. So let's go ahead and get to some questions. Let's see here. Let me scroll through. Sorry, I've been ignoring the chat this whole night. Let's see here. Oh, sweet! I'm glad the super chat thing here is working. I just set that up a while back. That's awesome. So let's see what we got here. Didn't Estonia implement blockchain technology for 2007 cyber attacking the power grid? I think they did, yes, but I'm not really sure how that shakes out, because I'm not really an expert on Estonia. Let's see here. I did appreciate the info, bro. Glad to find you. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, glad we've got more people listening in. Let's see here. Okay, cool. Good to see you. Let's see here. Time to sell gas. It's always sunny style. Yeah, I saw that meme come out earlier today, but I hesitate to think that would actually work. But yeah, we're gonna see some interesting stuff with gasoline come out over the next few days. But let me see here. If anybody has any questions for me, just go ahead and drop them in. I know it's sort of death by PowerPoint tonight, and there's a lot of stuff to cover, but just wanted to make sure I gave everybody the chance to ask questions. So, isn't it illegal to store gas on your property? It depends on what area you're in. So you have to check your local laws and whatnot, or make good decisions, I suppose, is the answer to that one. See, requesting more ATEX stuff. Yep, we got more ATEX stuff coming. ATEX stuff's really hard to get just right. Let's see here. Dark Lion. I see you there, bud. Let's see here. NC is having gas shortages. Yeah. North Carolina is pretty bad. See, if the network was air gapped, was an inside job. Good question. And that's the thing I sort of forgot to circle back around on. See how that works. Yes, perhaps. Maybe. I don't really know. I don't think we're ever going to know. But I would say that if the system was working properly, this should not have happened. So the system was either not working properly, or, like I wrote on the slide, there was some kind of insider thing. But I'm also seeing reports from the company where they stated that the actual entrance vector for the cyber attack was through the company's corporate stuff, like through the company's, stuff like email, right? Well, here's the deal, bud. That stuff's supposed to be air gapped anyway. So somebody messed up, right? And all those trillions of dollars we're spending on infrastructure, I guess, didn't really go to our gas stuff, right? So let's see here. Any rument on the microchip shortage? Not really. Not any rument. It's happening as a direct result of the world shutting down from that magical virus that I can't name, or else YouTube will flag this video and shut me down. So yeah, as far as I don't think it was nefarious, other than obviously the tyranny from that. But as far as actual chip shortage, I think it's just a second order effect of those shutdowns. Let's see here. Questions. California water problems. Buy water now. I'm not really familiar with the ins and outs of California water problems. I do reiterate what I briefed last time, which is that water is going to be a hot commodity coming up in the future. So if you can get access to water rights, I would very highly encourage to do so, as well as property. Real estate is crucial. So stuff like that. Is it likely the shortage affects other states like Oklahoma and Kansas? Possibly. I would say probably not. Not as much as you'd think. Everybody right now on social media it's like a dance. Like everything we do is trying to convey things in an accurate way to get people to freak out the right amount, right? And this is one of those things where it's like, I'm not screaming, we should go for the end of the world here type stuff. So I wouldn't expect places like Oklahoma and Kansas to have that big of a shortage. But I would say that, I would say that you're probably going to have it definitely price increases, maybe a shortage here and there from say, hey, there's only a certain number of freight companies that have capabilities of storing and transporting gasoline. So that's a zero sum game. If North Carolina gets it, you don't. So that's kind of how it works on that. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people are saying that this whole gas shortage thing was uh, the result of some kind of the Great Reset deal and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, but I can say that there are definitely parallels and such. I would say that people are right in thinking that this is not going to be the end of these kinds of events, because as we can see, right, the somebody asked me this question yesterday, and it the way to explain that is, look, if you know Klaus Schwab and his cronies, right, if they wanted to take out the United States, they would do stuff like this. But they would do other stuff as well, right? If Russia wanted to invade the United States, they're going to do this kind of thing, but they're also going to do 100 other things just like it. So by doing it now, we adapt, right? So the amount of infrastructure harm that an adversary gets from us being down on gasoline, right? We're learning more than they are, right? We're fixing the problems, right? Um, so that's something to keep in mind as well too. Now here's the kicker with that. If we have continuously event after event after event, like, guess what? Colonial Pipeline is not the only pipeline in the United States. We've got other pipelines. They're just the biggest one, right? And the most, I would say, probably the most damaging one. But hey, there's other stuff too. There's refineries, right, that feed into pipelines. Our refineries are being shut down right now because they're having to avoid sending gas down the pipeline, right? So other effects, if we're going to see an attack on the electrical grid or something like that, I would expect something like that to happen next. So yes, I think that these types of events are going to continue to happen because apparently our nation's intelligence services are far more interested um, with other things than actually protecting our nation. So citizens like us have to do the heavy lifting on this kind of stuff. So let's see here. Oh, sweet. Thanks, Warmham. Appreciate it. Nestle stock last week. Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the stock market. I wish I was smart enough to understand what is actually going on. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. Let's see here, I'm scrolling through the chat looking for any other questions. Do you think the news chatter about cybersecurity and the Colonial gas cyber attack are part of a larger agenda to destabilize the United States and create a collapse? Probably. Yeah, almost certainly. Yeah, why would you attack unless you're trying to cause harm to something? The question is who, like, what? I really don't care who it is, because at the end of the day, I mean, geez, would you believe anything the FBI says? The president comes out, the FBI comes out and says, "Yeah, it was Russia." Like, would you believe him? I mean, I wouldn't. I think it's laughable that anybody would believe the FBI nowadays. So it's kind of a moot point. You get into that rut of, well, you don't believe anything you hear, so why even bother with figuring out who it was? I suppose, but I think it's better to focus on prevention, I suppose. So yeah, of course, yeah, it's meant to destabilize stuff like that. Let's see. What is this UFO BS going on? I don't know, man. I wish I knew. I think it's kind of funny that you've got a group of people like the alien enthusiasts. Like, I'm not throwing shade or anything at anybody, but I do think it's interesting that the group of people that trust the government the least also immediately switches gears when it comes to aliens. Like, oh my God, the Navy released this. Look at this. This is proof aliens exist. I think that's kind of funny, but I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think a lot of this stuff is very, very interesting. But I also find it, if you're talking about the one the Navy released, I find it very hard to believe that the only sensor that captured it was some guy's iPhone through a PVS 14 or something, or PVS 15, something like that. So, Crypto's 4 mode point. Oh, hey, yeah, I should do that. I should. For those of you that don't know, we do have a merch store. Um, to make up for the gargantuan expenses we have here monthly to keep things running. So I'm gonna drop a new mug, or I'll have our art guy, because I can't draw to save my life, but I'll drop that in the store sometime within the next couple of days. Yeah, awesome. So, mitigation methods for new surveillance package. Yeah, that's a good question. Stay off social media. Don't if you like at this point in the time at this stage in the game. I really don't know what to say to people who have a Facebook page still. We have an Instagram. I haven't been on it in forever just because I get like nauseated every time I have to interact with it. But we kind of have to have it because, as you guys can plainly see, we've got what, like 1,700, and I think we hit 1,775 subscribers on YouTube today, which I think is awesome. But we've got like over 6,000 people on Instagram that don't engage. It's, they're still on Instagram, so avoid all social media as much as you can, right? Or have burner accounts, stuff like that. Be aware of what you like. Be aware of what people you follow, because that's how these things happen. That's how surveillance happens the most. So any more questions? I see we're coming up on our hour here. I think sticking with an hour is pretty good. Allows people to catch up and watch these, not when they're live. So take any more questions if anybody has them. It's too neat of our instrument. Everybody's drawing conclusions. That's funny. Nice. Yeah, no, we've got some really talented people uh, working here, donating their time. So, yeah, we've got, like I mentioned last briefing, I hate to end on a teasing note, but we've got some interesting stuff coming out. I think probably stuff that is just as significant as when we created ourselves. So, um, yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but we've got some projects we've been working on for a very long time, and we have poured a lot of man hours into, and we're going to be coming out with those very, very, very soon. So, yeah, I think we'll call it a day. As usual, if you have any other questions, DM us, DM me. You'll either get me or somebody else here, but you will get an answer to your question on whatever platform you choose, even on that dreaded Instagram, right? So, um, yeah, so make sure to check us out on other platforms for all kinds of stuff. We've got we've got what people want or need, I suppose. We've got all kinds of live tracking stuff. If you just want to hear updates from us, Telegram is a good place for that, because our writers can easily drop something and then just post it everywhere. If you're looking for more discussion, Keybase is good if you're already there. If you're not already there, Keybase is really grinding our gears here at the moment, not allowing us to add new members. So we're gradually shifting things over to Element. I don't want to tell everybody to go jump to Element right now from Keybase, because we're still working on some things, and Element is kind of a garbage platform when it comes to like bugs and stuff. But fear not, if you can't get into the Keybase, hop over to the Element and we will take care of you there. And there's a growing community there. There's a couple hundred people already over there, and it's growing more every day. So yeah, and also a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. You guys are the ones that directly funded us to allow us to host these live streams. So thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. I'm sorry if I forgot to mention at the first live stream, but now that we've got our groove going with these briefs, I just wanted to make that clear. You guys are supporting us, and you guys are helping us out that way. So thank you guys very much. Oh, also, I forgot to mention the slides for today. They will be hosted as a blog post on our website, and the link will be down below. Our tech guru has probably already changed the description for this video. If he hasn't already, I'll do it afterwards, in which case you'll have all of our sources, which actually I could skip to the next slide. There's our sources. You can pause and read, or you can, instead of manually typing these links, you can drop that. These will be dropped in the description below, and they will also be on our website. So check this out. Check all of our other platforms out, and thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time. So you guys know it. Fight in the shade.